In 71 BC, 6,000 men died along a single road, not in battle, but as decoration. Their screams echoed for weeks as vultures circled the Via Appia. This wasn't war. This was a message. Rome didn't just punish rebellion. It orchestrated suffering into spectacle, transformed agony into architecture, made terror into theater. For 1,000 years, an empire built on marble and law perfected something darker, the science of breaking the human spirit without ever letting it escape through death. The condemned man's name was Marcus. He stood at the arena gates as dawn broke over Rome, hands, shackled legs trembling. Beyond the iron bars, stagehands assembled wooden wings. A lion paced beneath torchlight ribs showing through matted fur. "You'll be Icarus today," the guard said, almost gently. Marcus didn't look at him. He was watching a small bird trapped in the rafters above, fluttering, panicking, searching for sky it would never reach. "How does the story end?" Marcus whispered. The guard touched his shoulder, not rough, almost kind. "Badly." Julia's face flashed in Marcus's mind, 6 years old, asleep on straw, still clutching the bread he'd stolen for her. She didn't wake when the guards kicked down their door at dawn. That was 3 days ago. He wondered if she knew he was still alive. The gates opened. 50,000 voices swallowed him whole. Rome built aqueducts that defied gravity and punishments that defied mercy. By the height of the empire, 135 days each year were devoted to blood. Mourning exotic animals torn apart for spectacle. Midday executions disguised as theater. Evening gladiators at least allowed to fight back. But the midday show was different. Damnatio ad Bestias, condemnation to the beasts, where criminals didn't just die. They died as someone else. Orpheus, Prometheus, Hercules. Their deaths rewritten as mythology, their suffering transformed into art. The philosopher Seneca attended these executions weekly. He wrote to his friend Lucilius, "I come home more greedy, more ambitious, more cruel, and more inhuman because I have been among humans." He kept going anyway. 3 months before Marcus entered the arena, a woman named Lucia stood in that same sand. They dressed her in silk painted to resemble flames, reds and golds that caught the morning light. Chains wrapped her wrists. A wooden post waited behind her. "Behold," the announcer's voice boomed across the Colosseum, "the punishment of the false prophet." Lucia had told fortunes in the forum without imperial license. Worse, she'd warned a senator's wife, "Your husband will die screaming." 3 days later, the senator choked on a fishbone at dinner. Nero wanted her death to be memorable. 50,000 Romans leaned forward as they chained her to the post. A trained vulture, starved for days, was released from a cage above. The bird circled once, twice. Lucia didn't scream. She locked eyes with the emperor's box and spoke clearly enough for the front rows to hear. "I see the future Caesar. Rome burns. And you're the one holding the torch." Nero stopped chewing his grapes. "What did she say?" His advisor paled. "Nothing, my lord. The madness of the condemned." Nero waved his hand. "Make it slower." The vulture descended, but Lucia's eyes never left Nero's face, even as the bird struck, even as blood ran down her painted silk. In the front row, a 10-year-old girl named Perpetua dropped her honeyed dates and started crying. Her mother slapped her quiet. "Don't waste tears on traitors." After 60 seconds, Nero grew bored. "Enough. Bring the bull." The bronze bull of Phalaris had been created 500 years earlier in Sicily, a hollow statue, beautiful and terrible. Brass tubes ran through its throat, designed by engineers to transform human screams into something resembling a roar. When Nero imported it to Rome, he called it the voice of divine judgment. They opened the bull's back. Lucia's legs gave out as guards dragged her toward it. "Please," she whispered. Not to the emperor, to the little girl still crying in the front row. "Remember my name." They shoved her inside, sealed it, lit the fire beneath. For 90 seconds, nothing. Then the bull began to sing. Not a roar, not music. Something between weeping and metal screaming a sound that made the crowd fall silent despite themselves. Perpetua covered her ears and squeezed her eyes shut, but she couldn't block out the sound. It followed her home that night, into her dreams, into every quiet moment for the rest of her life. 17 minutes later, the singing stopped. Nero stood and applauded. Divine justice has spoken. The crowd erupted, relieved it was over, grateful to cheer, desperate to forget what they'd just witnessed by celebrating it. Perpetua never returned to the Colosseum. 30 years later, when Roman soldiers came to arrest her for being a Christian, she refused to recant her faith. Before they executed her, she told her guard, "I've been dying since I was 10 years old. This is just the end of a very long scream." When he asked what she meant, she said, "I remember Lucia." But Rome's cruelty wasn't random madness. It was policy. In Rome, your punishment depended on your birth. Roman citizen, convicted of theft, exile, maybe a fine. Slave convicted of theft, crucifixion. Same crime, different world. The historian Suetonius wrote, "Justice in Rome was a theater where your seat was determined before you entered." This system worked for centuries because Romans believed punishment revealed character, that how you died proved what you were. And if you were a slave, a rebel, or simply unlucky enough to be poor, Rome decided your character long before your trial. Marcus walked across the arena sand, wearing wax wings that cut into his shoulders. The crowd roared approval. They loved Icarus, the boy who flew too close to the sun, whose ambition melted his wings and dropped him into the sea. Hubris punished, order restored. But Marcus wasn't playing along. Halfway across the sand, he stopped, dropped the wings, turned toward the emperor's box. "My name is Marcus." His voice cracked, barely audible over the crowd's confusion. The lion was already charging from the opposite gate 20 feet away, then 10. "I have a daughter. Her name is Julia, 5 feet. I stole bread because she was hungry." The lion leaped. Marcus opened his arms. "That's the truth. Not a myth, just true." Impact, silence. Then the crowd exploded, not in celebration, but in chaos. Some cheered. Some booed. A woman in the upper seats screamed, "Murderers!" before her husband pulled her down. The emperor's box remained still, but something had shifted. For one crystalline second, 50,000 people knew his name. Not Icarus, not a myth, not a character in Rome's eternal play. Marcus, a father, a thief, a man who died speaking his daughter's name. Rome could take his life, but it couldn't take his last words. 2 years before Marcus died, something impossible happened at Pompey's games. The game's master had ordered 20 elephants to execute condemned criminals by trampling a spectacle imported from Carthaginian traditions meant to demonstrate Rome's dominion over both beasts and men. The elephants had been trained for months, starved, beaten, conditioned to kill on command. The day arrived. 100,000 Romans packed the Circus Maximus. The prisoners were brought out, 14 men and 3 women, all convicted of theft or desertion. They knelt in the sand, wrists bound, heads bowed. The signal was given. The elephants refused. Not one, all 20. They stood motionless, huge and gray and impossibly still, while trainers screamed and the crowd grew restless and confused. Then the oldest elephant, a female with scars across her trunk and a notched left ear, began walking toward the prisoners. The crowd held its breath. She stopped in front of a man named Cassius. He looked up, eyes wet. "Maya." The elephant's ears flared. She made a sound, low rumbling, almost like a purr. Cassius had worked in Pompey's menagerie 5 years earlier before he was convicted of stealing grain. He'd been Maya's keeper, fed her extra hay when no one watched, spoke to her gently in the mornings before the other trainers arrived. "I'm sorry," Cassius whispered, reaching up with his bound hands. "I'm so sorry." Maya lowered her head, wrapped her trunk around his shoulders, held him. For 90 seconds, nothing happened. Man and elephant standing together while Rome waited to see what mercy looked like. A trainer ran forward with a whip. "Kill him now." Maia turned her head toward the trainer. Didn't move. Didn't break her hold on Cassius. The other 19 elephants formed a line, a wall between the prisoners and the trainers. In the Emperor's box, Pompey's face darkened. He stood. Archers. His advisor leaned close. My lord, the crowd. Archers. Someone in the upper seat shouted, let them live. Another voice, the gods refused the sacrifice. The chant built not from the wealthy seats, but from the top rows where laborers and freedmen sat. People who understood what it meant to steal food to survive. People who recognized themselves in Cassius. Pompey raised his hand. The elephant first, then the man. 20 arrows struck Maia from 3 directions. She staggered but didn't release Cassius. Her legs buckled. She collapsed forward, her massive body forming a shelter over him. Even dying, she tried to protect him. The archers shot Cassius through the gaps in her ribs. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't applaud. For the first time in Roman history, they booed their own emperor. Cicero was there that day. He wrote to his friend Atticus, I witnessed something I cannot fully explain. A great multitude moved to pity for elephants, as though the beasts possessed a kinship with humanity that we ourselves have lost. It was as if the animals shamed us by their refusal to commit the cruelty we demanded. Seneca stopped attending the games after that day. He never explained why in his letters. But his philosophy shifted. He began writing about compassion, about how spectacle corrupts, about how a crowd leaving the arena is more dangerous than a crowd entering it because they have practiced cruelty and called it justice. But Rome didn't change. The games continued. The executions multiplied. When Christianity emerged decades later, Romans were so accustomed to death as entertainment that the cross, that instrument of slow torture, had become boring. So they innovated. Christians were sewn into animal skins and released to hunting dogs, crucified upside down, covered in pitch and burned alive as torches to light Nero's garden parties. Nero himself would later fulfill Lucia's prophecy, setting Rome ablaze in 64 AD, then blaming the Christians to deflect suspicion. As the city burned, witnesses reported seeing him on the palace roof playing his lyre and singing about the fall of Troy. All the world's a stage, he supposedly said, and Rome the greatest theater of all. But here's what Rome never understood. Cruelty has diminishing returns. You can kill the body. You can erase names from stone. You can turn suffering into art and death into spectacle. But you cannot kill the human capacity to bear witness. Marcus died in that arena. His body was dumped in a mass grave outside the city walls. His name was never recorded in any official history. But his daughter Julia survived. She grew up in the slums of Subura, raised by a neighbor who'd heard about Marcus's execution. The woman told Julia everything, how her father died, speaking her name, how the crowd heard him, how for just one moment, Rome couldn't silence his truth. Julia never forgot. When she was 16, she joined the Christians, not because she believed in their God, but because they were the only people in Rome who said suffering mattered, that the poor had dignity, that mercy wasn't weakness. Decades later, when Roman soldiers came to arrest her for refusing to worship the emperor's statue, she stood in the same Colosseum where her father died. The crowd expected her to beg, to recant, to break. Instead, she spoke clearly. My father's name was Marcus. He died here speaking my name. Now I die here speaking his. Rome, you can take our lives, but you'll never take our voices. The lions were released. But this time something changed. People in the crowd started standing, not cheering, just standing, silent, witnessing. By the time Julia's body was carried out, 300 Romans had walked out of the Colosseum in protest. Small number, meaningless in a city of 1 million. But seeds don't need to be large, they just need to be planted. The Roman Empire would continue for 3 more centuries. The games would grow larger, bloodier, more elaborate. But the machinery of terror had met its limit, not in revolution, but in the quiet, stubborn insistence of ordinary people who refused to let suffering be meaningless. Marcus, Lucia, Cassius, Maia, Perpetua, Julia, names Rome tried to erase, names that survived anyway. Because here's the truth, Rome never learned. You can crucify the body, you can feed it to beasts, you can burn it alive in a bronze bull while crowds applaud, but you cannot kill a name spoken in defiance. You cannot erase a death that means something. And you cannot build an empire on terror without eventually teaching your citizens that mercy, rare divine, costly mercy, is the only force powerful enough to break the cycle. Julia's body was never found. The official records say she was executed and buried in the criminal graves outside Rome. But there are other stories whispered among early Christians, recorded in fragments discovered centuries later in Cappadocian caves. Stories that say she survived, that someone in the arena, a guard perhaps, or a beast master, who'd had enough, opened a service gate during the chaos. That Julia escaped into the catacombs beneath Rome, where communities of the condemned were building something new in the darkness. That she lived another 40 years teaching children to read, preserving the names of the forgotten, writing them on walls that still exist today if you know where to look. Her final words carved in a catacomb near the Via Appia, they gave us numbers. We kept our names. Rome discovered something it never intended. The cruelest torture isn't inflicted on the body. It's the attempt to erase that you ever existed. And the most powerful resistance isn't violence, it's remembering. The catacombs beneath Rome smelled like wet stone and ancient fear. Julia pressed her palm against the wall, tracing carved names in the darkness. Marcus, Lucia, Cassius. Hundreds more people Rome tried to erase, preserved by those who refused to forget. A voice behind her, "You're bleeding." She looked down. Her hands were torn from climbing through the sewers, fingernails black with grime. 3 days since the arena, 3 days running. "Doesn't matter," she said. The old woman, Helena, leader of this underground community, stepped closer with a lamp. Her face was scarred on the left side, burn marks from decades past. "Everything matters down here. That's why we survive." Julia turned back to the wall, found an empty space, used a piece of broken tile to scratch new letters into the stone. Maya, the elephant who refused. "They killed her for showing mercy," Julia whispered. Helena touched the carved name gently. "Then we remember her for it." Footsteps echoed from the tunnel above. Both women froze. A man's voice muffled, "Search every passage. The Emperor wants her found." Helena grabbed Julia's wrist. "This way, quickly." They disappeared deeper into the earth, where Rome's light couldn't reach, where Rome's laws didn't matter, where the forgotten were building something that would outlast the empire itself. But mercy was a luxury the Roman army couldn't afford. 600 miles north in the forests of Germania, 20,000 legionaries prepared for morning inspection. The 9th Legion, Rome's iron fist on the frontier, undefeated for 30 years, until yesterday. Centurion Gaius Varro stood before his century 80 men who'd followed him through snow starvation and 3 years of guerrilla warfare. His face was stone. "Someone broke formation during the ambush," he said quietly. "One man ran. Because of him, 16 brothers died." The soldiers stood rigid, eyes forward. No one moved. Varro walked down the line slowly, stopped in front of a young recruit named Titus, barely 19, fresh-faced, still had all his teeth. "Was it you?" Titus's jaw trembled. "Sir, yes or no?" A long silence. Wind through the trees. Somewhere in the forest a crow called. "Yes, sir." The other soldiers' faces didn't change, but something shifted in their eyes. Not anger, something colder. Varro stepped back, raised his voice so the entire legion could hear. "This man abandoned his brothers in battle. Roman law is clear. The punishment for cowardice is fustuarium." Titus's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, hands shaking. "Please," he whispered. "Please, I have a son." "So did the 16 men who died covering your retreat." Varro turned to the sentry. Form the circle. Fustuarium beaten to death by your own comrades. Not with swords, not quickly. With clubs and stones and fists, every man in the unit forced to participate, binding them together through shared guilt. The soldiers formed a ring around Titus. Each man was handed a wooden stake. Titus looked up at them, these men he'd eaten with, marched with, joked with during night watches. Men who'd saved his life a dozen times. One of them, a veteran named Marcus. No relation to the Marcus from the arena, but carrying the same name like a curse, met Titus's eyes for just a second. "I'm sorry," Marcus mouthed silently. Then he raised his stake. "Begin," Varro commanded. The first blow came from behind. Titus lurched forward. A second blow from the side. He tried to cover his head with his arms. Useless. The beating lasted 4 minutes. Afterward, the soldiers stood in silence, stakes dropped in the grass, hands covered in blood that wasn't enemy blood, the kind that doesn't wash off. Varro's voice was quieter now, almost gentle. "This is how Rome survives. Not through mercy, through discipline, through making hard choices, through teaching every man that the unit matters more than the individual." He looked at each soldier in turn. "We are not men anymore. We are Rome, and Rome does not forgive weakness." The soldiers saluted, perfectly synchronized, perfectly empty. But that night in his tent, Marcus, the veteran, sat staring at his hands and couldn't stop shaking. He'd killed enemies before. Hundreds. Never lost sleep. This was different. This was his brother. Fustuarium was Rome's gift to military discipline, punishment so brutal it transformed soldiers into something beyond human, beyond mercy, beyond doubt. But there was something worse, something that made Fustuarium look like kindness, decimation. 2 weeks after Titus died, the 9th Legion faced disaster. A Germania ambush in a river valley, 20,000 Romans against 40,000 tribal warriors who knew every tree, every path, every hidden ravine. The Romans broke, not the whole legion, just one cohort, 600 men who saw their comrades butchered in the front lines and decided survival mattered more than honor. They ran. By the time the battle ended, 3,000 Romans were dead. The cohort that fled had saved themselves. But they'd abandoned 800 brothers to die. When news reached Rome, Emperor Galba's response was immediate: decimate them. The messenger who delivered the order looked sick. "My lord, that's 600 men. We'll execute 60. I know how to count. Do it." Decimation from the Latin decimare, meaning removal of a tenth. When a unit disgraced Rome through cowardice, every 10th man would be selected by lottery and beaten to death by the other 9. The mathematics of terror. The randomness was the point. Good soldiers died alongside bad ones, making everyone equally terrified, equally implicated, equally broken. Commander Aurelius stood before the 600 men of the disgraced cohort. His voice carried across the parade ground. "You abandoned your brothers. You chose survival over honor. Rome cannot allow this." He held up a leather bag containing stone lots, black for death, white for life. "Form groups of 10. Each group will draw. 1 black stone per group." The soldiers didn't move, didn't breathe. One man, a 20-year veteran named Flavius, stepped forward. "Sir, respectfully, we were following orders. The tribune commanded retreat. The tribune is dead, killed in the battle you fled. Who else will speak for you?" Silence. Flavius's hands curled into fists. "This isn't justice. This is murder." Aurelius didn't blink. "This is Rome." The soldiers formed into groups of 10. Each group approached the bag, drew lots, opened their hands. In the third group, a young soldier named Lucian stared at the black stone in his palm. The man beside him, Quintus, his tentmate for 3 years, grabbed his shoulder. No, you drew too fast. Let me." "Quintus, don't. You have a wife, a daughter. I'll take it. I'll say it was mine." "Quintus." Lucian gripped his friend's arm. "You have a family too." "Then we run, right now, both of us." They'll kill 10 more if we do. You know that. Quintus was crying now, not even hiding it. This isn't right. You didn't even run. You stayed until the end. Doesn't matter what's right. Matters what is. Lucian handed his gladius to Quintus, knelt in the dirt. Make it clean, please. 63 men died that day. 3 groups drew 2 black stones by accident soldiers who'd grabbed stones simultaneously, confusion in the chaos. Aurelius ordered both executed in each case. Fate has spoken. The survivors beat their brothers to death with clubs. Standard procedure, binding them through shared trauma. But something broke. After the decimation, the cohort never functioned the same. Men stopped trusting each other, stopped caring. In the next battle, a minor skirmish near the Rhine, they fought mechanically efficiently and without any of the brotherhood that makes a legion elite. They survived. But they weren't Roman anymore. They were just men who'd killed their friends and called it discipline. Marcus, the veteran, the one who'd beaten Titus to death weeks earlier, sat in his tent that night, sharpening a knife that didn't need sharpening. Another soldier entered, sat down without asking. "You thinking about deserting?" he asked quietly. Marcus didn't look up. "Every day." "What stops you?" "Where would I go? I'm Roman. That's all I've ever been." The other soldier nodded. "Yeah." A long silence. Wind through canvas. Distant sound of sentries changing shifts. "You know what I realized," Marcus said finally. "Rome doesn't need enemies. We're destroying ourselves just fine." "Careful. That's traitor talk." "Is it?" Marcus looked at him. "We beat Titus to death for running. Then we beat 63 men to death for running. How long before they beat us to death for questioning if any of this makes sense?" The other soldier stood to leave. Stopped at the tent flap. "Probably not long," he said softly. "But at least we'll die knowing we were right." He left. Marcus went back to sharpening his knife. But decimation wasn't the cruelest part. It was what Rome did with the survivors. After a unit was decimated, the remaining soldiers weren't just traumatized, they were marked. The legion was forced to camp outside the city walls, fed only barley instead of wheat. Denied salt rations that prevented scurvy. Humiliation as policy. The disgraced cohort of the 9th Legion endured this for 6 months. Men developed skin lesions, lost teeth, watched brothers die from infections that proper food would have prevented. And through it all, they had to watch regular legions march past them into Rome, celebrated honored human. One night, a soldier named Decimus stood at the edge of their barley ration camp, staring at the city lights in the distance. His friend Gaius joined him. "Remember when we used to be heroes?" Decimus said. Gaius laughed bitter hollow. "Were we, or were we just men who followed orders until the orders ran out?" "I don't know anymore." That's the point. They break you until you don't know. Until you stop asking questions. Until you're grateful just to be Roman, no matter what Rome asks you to do. Decimus turned to look at his friend. "You sound like a Christian." "Maybe the Christians are right." "Careful." "Why, what's Rome going to do? Execute me. They already did. I'm just waiting for my body to notice." Gaius walked away. Decimus stood there alone, watching the city that had made him a monster and called it glory. But there was one form of punishment worse than fustuarium, worse than decimation, worse than anything the army inflicted on its own: crucifixion. The slave revolt led by Spartacus had ended 70 years before Marcus died in the arena. But Rome remembered. 6,000 rebels captured after the final battle were crucified along the Via Appia from Capua to Rome. 120 miles of crosses, one body every 40 feet. The historian Appian wrote, "The road became a forest of the dying, their cries audible for miles." It took 3 weeks for the last man to die. Rome didn't do this for justice. They did it for memory, to create a monument to suffering so vast, so inescapable, that anyone who walked that road would understand rebellion dies slowly. One of those 6,000 was named Darius. He'd been a field slave in Campania before joining Spartacus. Never killed anyone. Just wanted to be free. Fought in 3 battles, survived 2, captured in the 3rd. Now he hung on a cross between 2 strangers, wrists nailed through the nerve clusters, feet nailed together, lungs slowly collapsing under his own weight. The worst part wasn't the pain, it was watching the people pass beneath. Families on their way to Rome, merchants with carts, Roman citizens going about their lives not even looking up anymore. The crosses had become scenery. On the 2nd day, a little boy stopped beneath Darius's cross, maybe 6 years old. "Mama, why is that man up there?" His mother pulled him along. "He was bad. Don't look." "Is he sleeping?" "Something like that." They kept walking. Darius wanted to scream at her. "I'm not bad. I'm not sleeping. I'm dying. Please just see me." But his lungs couldn't pull enough air to speak, so he hung there in silence, invisible to the living, slowly becoming part of the landscape. Crucifixion was designed to maximize suffering while minimizing speed. Death came from asphyxiation, the weight of your body pulling down, collapsing your lungs. To breathe, you had to push up on the nails in your feet, pull on the nails in your wrists. Every breath was a choice to torture yourself further. Most men lasted 2 to 4 days. Darius lasted 6. On the 5th day, the man on the cross to his right, a former gladiator named Crixus, managed to speak. "Brother." Darius turned his head, agony in his neck. "Yeah. What was your real name? What? Before slavery. What did your mother call you?" Darius had to think. He'd been called boy and slave and property for so long. "Alexios," he whispered finally. "My name was Alexios." Crixus smiled, cracked lips, broken teeth, but real. "Good. Name." He died an hour later. Darius Alexios hung there alone, repeating his real name over and over in his mind like a prayer. Alexios. 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 Rome could crucify his body, but it couldn't take the name his mother gave him. When Alexios finally died on the 6th day, his body was left hanging for another week. Standard procedure: let the birds finish the work. Let the bones sun-bleach until they're white as marble. Let everyone who walks this road understand what happens when you challenge Rome. But something unexpected happened. At night, people came. Slaves mostly. Freedmen. The poor. They couldn't take the bodies down, that was a death sentence. But they left things at the base of the crosses. Flowers, bread, coins for Charon the ferryman of the dead. Small acts of remembrance that said, "You were human. You mattered. We saw you." By the time the Romans noticed and posted guards, there were hundreds of offerings along the Via Appia, silent rebellion, the kind Rome couldn't crucify. Commander Aurelius, the same man who'd ordered the decimation, walked the Via Appia one evening surveying the crosses. His aide walked beside him. "Sir, there's something you should know. The offerings at the crosses, they're not stopping, even with guards. People wait until night and... I know. Should we increase patrols?" Aurelius stopped, looked up at the skeleton that had been Alexios' bones, gleaming in the sunset. "No. Sir, you can't patrol memory. You can't guard against people who refuse to forget." He started walking again. The crosses were supposed to teach them fear, but they're learning something else. "What's that, sir?" "That suffering can be witnessed, that the crucified can be remembered. That memory is more powerful than terror." His aide looked confused. "Is that a problem?" Aurelius didn't answer. But that night, he wrote a letter to his son, a boy studying philosophy in Athens, safe from the empire's machinery of violence. "I have crucified men for Rome. I have decimated legions for Rome. I have turned brothers against brothers and called it discipline. And now I wonder what happens when an empire runs out of people willing to inflict suffering. What happens when mercy becomes more attractive than glory?" He never sent the letter, burned it instead, because asking those questions was more dangerous than any rebellion. 20 years after the Via Appia crosses came down, Rome faced a new problem: Christians. They didn't rebel, didn't form armies, didn't challenge Rome's borders. They just refused to call the emperor divine, and they remembered the crucified. They made the cross, Rome's ultimate symbol of terror, into a symbol of hope. They said suffering wasn't meaningless. They said the executed mattered. They said mercy was stronger than empire. Rome tried everything: burned them alive, fed them to lions, crucified them by the thousands. And every time more Christians emerged, because Rome had taught the world how to suffer spectacularly. The Christians taught them how to suffer meaningfully. In the catacombs beneath Rome, Julia finished carving another name into the wall: Alexios, the man who died remembering who he was. Helena stood behind her with the lamp. "How many names now?" Julia asked. "Thousands. Maybe tens of thousands. We'll never know all of them. Is it enough? To do what? To change anything. To make Rome stop." Helena was quiet for a long time. "Rome will fall eventually," she said finally. "All empires do. But these names, they'll outlast the empire. That's the only victory that matters." Footsteps in the tunnel above again, closer this time. "We need to move deeper," Helena whispered. But Julia stayed still, finishing the last letter of Alexios's name. "One more," she said. "Just one more." Above them, torchlight flickered at the tunnel entrance. A Roman voice. "Found something. Fresh carvings." Helena grabbed Julia's arm. "Now!" They ran into the darkness as soldiers poured into the catacomb behind them, boots echoing off stone that held 10,000 names Rome tried to erase. The chase was on. And in the empire above, in the armies, in the arenas, in the Senate itself, cracks were forming in the machinery of terror. Because Rome had discovered something it never intended. You can crucify the body. You can decimate the legion. You can turn brothers into executioners. But you cannot kill the human need to remember. And once people start remembering the victims, instead of celebrating the victor's empire, begins its slow collapse into dust. The soldier's torch swept across the catacomb wall, illuminating thousands of carved names. "Gods," he whispered. "There must be 10,000. "Don't touch them," his commander snapped. "Mark the location. We'll seal it tomorrow." Julia and Helena crouched in a side passage 20 feet away, pressed against cold stone, breathing through their teeth. The lamplight had died, pure darkness now. Helena's lips touched Julia's ear. "When I move, you run opposite direction, split their attention." "No." "Julia, I didn't survive the arena just to let someone else die for me. That's exactly why you need to survive. Someone has to remember." Before Julia could argue, Helena was gone. Footsteps deliberately loud, running toward the deeper tunnels. "There!" The soldiers charged after the sound. Julia ran the other way, hands scraping stone, navigating by memory and touch. Behind her, Helena's footsteps stopped abruptly. A scuffle. A woman's grunt of pain. Then silence. Julia kept running. Tears streaming, hating herself for it. Hating Rome more. She emerged 3 hours later through a drain hole near the Tiber, gasping river air covered in filth. The Forum rose ahead, marble temples gleaming in dawn light, another perfect Roman morning. A vendor setting up his stall stared at her. "You all right, girl?" Julia wiped her face, tried to look normal, failed. "Just fell. I'm fine." She walked toward the Suburra district, toward people who'd hide her, but her mind was still in those tunnels. Helena captured. Probably dead by noon. Another name for the wall. If there was anyone left to carve it. But Helena wasn't dead. They brought her to the Tullianum, Rome's oldest prison, carved into the rock beneath the Capitoline Hill. A hole in the ground where enemies of state waited for execution. The jailer, a man named Rufus, 60 years old, 30 of them spent watching prisoners die, pushed her down the stone steps. "Emperor wants you alive for the games next week," he said. "Try to stay that way." Helena landed hard. Hands caught her other prisoners in the darkness. "Easy," a man's voice. "You're safe. Well, safer than you were." Her eyes adjusted. 12 people in the cell, men and women, some with Christian crosses tattooed on their wrists. Others just looked poor. "What did they get you for?" the man asked. "Memory," Helena said. He laughed short, bitter. "Yeah, that'll do it." Above ground, Rome prepared for Emperor Commodus's games, the greatest spectacle in a decade. 10 days of celebration for the emperor's birthday. Commodus had announced he'd personally appear in the arena as a gladiator dressed as Hercules naturally. The Senate was horrified. Senator Marcius stood in the Curia addressing his colleagues with barely controlled rage. An emperor in the arena fighting like a common slave. This is madness. Senator Quintus Younger, more pragmatic, shook his head. This is Commodus. He believes he's Hercules reborn. Arguing with a god is dangerous. He's not a god. He's a spoiled child playing dress-up while Rome rots. Careful, Quintus glanced around. The walls have ears, literally. He pays street children to report sedition. Marcius lowered his voice. How did we get here? How did the empire of Marcus Aurelius, philosopher emperor, the last of the good ones, produce this? Sons rarely live up to their fathers, especially when their fathers are legends. Then what do we do? Quintus was quiet for a long moment. We survive, he said finally. And we remember what Rome used to be, before it became a circus. But Commodus wasn't interested in what Rome used to be. He stood in his private arena, smaller than the Colosseum, reserved for practice, holding a gladius that cost more than most Romans earned in a lifetime. Gold inlaid handle. His name engraved in the blade. His trainer, a former champion named Narcissus, circled him carefully. My lord, your stance is perfect. My stance is perfect. Of course, I only meant Commodus attacked. Fast, reckless, no technique. Narcissus blocked easily, stepped aside, let the emperor's momentum carry him past. Again, Commodus roared. They fought for another 5 minutes. Commodus landing no hits. Narcissus gently redirecting every strike, making it look like the emperor was almost winning. Almost. Finally, Commodus threw down his sword. You're letting me lose. Never, my lord. Don't lie to me. Narcissus knelt. Forgive me. You're simply learning. All great warriors must learn. Commodus stared at him, breathing hard, face red. Next week in the Colosseum, I fight a real opponent, not training, real. My lord, the risk. I'm Hercules. I don't fear risk. Of course not, but perhaps a wounded opponent, someone already. You think I'm weak? No, my lord, I think you're... Commodus grabbed Narcissus by the throat, not squeezing, just holding, making a point. I think you're afraid of what happens if I lose, Commodus whispered. But here's the truth, old friend. If I lose in that arena, you die. Your family dies. Everyone you've ever spoken to dies. Do you understand? Narcissus nodded, barely. Commodus released him, smiled. Good, then make sure I win. He walked out, leaving Narcissus on his knees, gasping, understanding he'd just been given an impossible order. Make the emperor win against a real opponent in front of 50,000 witnesses without anyone noticing the fix. The games began 3 days later. Morning exotic animals. A rhinoceros fought a bear. Both died. The crowd loved it. Midday executions. Helena was brought out with 11 others from the Tullianum. They were dressed in rags, unarmed, blinking in the sudden sunlight. The announcer's voice boomed, Behold the punishment of enemies of Rome. The crowd roared. But something was different this time. In the upper seats, the cheap sections where laborers and freedmen sat, people weren't cheering. They were watching, silent, witnessing. Helena noticed. She straightened her back, lifted her chin. "My name is Helena," she shouted, voice cracking but clear. "I taught children to read. I carved names of the forgotten. I chose memory over obedience." The Emperor's box shifted. Commodus leaned forward, annoyed. "Release the lions." But before the gates opened, another prisoner, a young man, maybe 20, stepped forward. "My name is Tertius. I believed mercy was stronger than empire." Then another. "My name is Claudia. I refuse to forget the crucified." One by one, all 12 prisoners shouted their names and their crimes. The crowd fell silent. Even Commodus stopped eating grapes, because this wasn't how it was supposed to work. The condemned were supposed to beg, to recant, to break. Instead, they were transforming their execution into testimony. The lion gates opened. Helena closed her eyes, but she was smiling. In the upper seats, Julia watched from behind a stolen hood. She'd come to witness, to remember Helena's name when no one else would. But she wasn't alone. 300 others sat in that section, Christians mostly, but others too. Former slaves, freedmen, people who'd lost someone to Rome's machinery and never forgot. When Helena shouted her name, Julia stood. Then the person beside her stood. Then another. Within seconds, 300 people were standing in silent solidarity. Not cheering, not protesting, just standing, bearing witness. The rest of the Colosseum noticed. Soldiers moved toward the section, but slowly, uncertain. This wasn't a riot. This wasn't rebellion. This was something Rome had no protocol for. Commodus stood in his box. "Sit down." No one moved. "I said sit down." Still nothing. His face went purple. "Archers." "My lord," his advisor's hand on his arm. "Not here. Not like this. They want to be martyrs. Don't give them what they want." Commodus's jaw worked. He wanted blood, wanted obedience, but shooting citizens in the Colosseum, Roman citizens, not criminals, that was a line even he couldn't cross. Not yet. He sat down, waved his hand. "Continue." The lions charged. Julia watched Helena die, but she watched 50,000 other Romans watch too, and for the first time in centuries the crowd looked disturbed. Not entertained. Disturbed. That night, Commodus summoned Senator Marcius to the palace. Marcius entered the throne room expecting execution. Instead, Commodus was pacing, agitated. "They stood," Commodus said. 300 of them just stood there. "Yes, my lord." "Why? I don't know." "You're a senator. You're supposed to know these things." Marcius chose his words carefully. "Perhaps they're tired." Tired of what? Of blood, of spectacle, of watching people die for entertainment. Commodus stopped pacing, stared at him. "Are you saying my games are unpopular?" "I'm saying Rome is changing." "Rome doesn't change. Rome is eternal. Even eternal things can rot from within." The words hung in the air. Commodus stepped closer. "Are you calling me rot, Senator?" "I'm calling the system rot. You're just inheriting it." For a moment, Marcius thought he was dead. Then Commodus laughed. Bitter, hollow. "You know what's funny? My father, the great Marcus Aurelius philosopher, emperor, beloved by all, he attended games too. Watched people die. Never stopped it. Never even questioned it. Your father was complicated. My father was a hypocrite. Wrote about virtue while maintaining a torture state. At least I'm honest about what Rome is." He turned away, staring at a bust of his father. "I'm going to fight in the arena next week. As Hercules. I'll win. The crowd will love me. And everything will go back to normal. And if they don't, then I'll kill enough people until they do." Marcius was dismissed. Walking out of the palace, he realized Commodus wasn't defending the games. He was defending himself against the creeping understanding that maybe, just maybe, his entire life was built on something monstrous, and that understanding terrified him more than any enemy. The philosopher Epictetus wrote decades earlier, "It's not death a man should fear, but never beginning to live." Rome was a civilization that had never begun to live. It had survived, conquered, expanded, built monuments to its own glory, but it had never learned to live with mercy. And now, in its decadence, surrounded by marble temples and golden statues, and 50,000 people, watching 12 prisoners die with dignity, Rome was finally beginning to feel the weight of every name it tried to erase. In the catacombs, Julia returned with 5 others. They found the tunnel the soldiers had marked. The entrance was sealed with bricks and mortar still wet. "Can we break through?" someone asked. Julia touched the wall. "No. They've collapsed half the tunnel. It'd take weeks." "Then those names are lost." "No." She pulled out a piece of charcoal. "We write them again. Everywhere. On every wall in Rome if we have to." She started writing. Helena, Alexios, Marcus, Lucia, Cassius, Maya. The others joined her. And in the darkness beneath the eternal city in tunnels Rome would never fully map. A resistance was being written in carbon and memory, names that would outlast emperors. Narcissus the trainer sat in his quarters, staring at the gladius he'd been given. Next week he'd enter the Colosseum with Commodus. The emperor would fight a real opponent, a prisoner probably drugged, definitely weakened. Narcissus's job was to make sure the emperor won. But he'd been a gladiator for 30 years before becoming a trainer. He knew how fights actually worked. And he knew something else. If he accidentally let the prisoner land a real blow, just one in the right place, Commodus would die. The madness would end. Rome might have a chance. His hand tightened on the sword handle, but his family, his daughter, his grandson, who'd just learned to walk. Commodus had made it clear the emperor's life was worth more than 1,000 others. Fail and everyone Narcissus loved would die. Succeed and Rome would continue rotting under a madman. He closed his eyes. Wondered when the choice to do the right thing became impossible. Wondered if that was Rome's real torture, not the cross, not the arena, not the bronze bull, but the slow realization that the system was designed to make good people into executioners. And the only way to stop being an executioner was to become a victim. The week passed. Julia carved names. Narcissus sharpened swords. Commodus practiced being Hercules. Senator Marcius drafted a letter to provincial governors warning them Rome was unstable. Never sent it, burned it instead. And in the Colosseum, 50,000 seats waited to be filled, for a spectacle that would either save Rome or prove it was beyond saving. The morning of the games, Julia stood on a rooftop overlooking the Forum. Beside her, 3 other survivors from the catacombs. Young, determined, angry. Today, one of them said, "We make them remember." Julia shook her head. "No, today we make them uncomfortable." "What's the difference?" "Remembering is passive. Discomfort demands action." She pulled out a bundle of fabric, white cloth, dyed red at the edges. Dozens of them. "When the emperor enters the arena, we drop these from the upper seats. Each one has a name written on it. The forgotten, the executed, the erased. They'll arrest us. Probably. We could die. Definitely." Silence. Then one of them smiled. Helena would have loved this. Julia smiled back. Helena would have done it better. They headed toward the Colosseum as the sun rose over Rome. The final games of Commodus were about to begin. And somewhere between the arena sand and the emperor's box, between the crowd's expectations and the performer's terror, Rome's machinery of suffering was about to break in a way no one predicted. Because empire can survive rebellion. It can survive war. It can even survive military defeat. But it cannot survive the moment when its citizens stop believing suffering is entertainment and start recognizing it as evidence of their own moral collapse. That moment was coming, and it was wearing Hercules' costume. The Colosseum filled before dawn. 50,000 bodies pressing into stone seats, vendors hawking wine and roasted nuts, children on their fathers' shoulders. Another day of games, another spectacle. But something felt different. In the upper sections, people weren't laughing, weren't betting on outcomes. They were watching the arena entrance with the same expression you'd wear at a funeral. Julia and her 3 companions climbed to the highest tier bundles of red-stained cloth hidden under their cloaks. Below them, the entire architecture of Roman power spread out like a map of empire senators in purple equestrians in white, the imperial box draped in gold. "When," one of her companions whispered, "when he enters. When all eyes are on him. And if they catch us before, then someone else does it tomorrow. The names don't stop just because we do." A trumpet blast. The crowd noise died. The announcer's voice echoed. "Citizens of Rome, today you witness divinity made flesh. Hercules reborn your emperor Commodus." The gates opened. Commodus strode into the arena wearing a lion skin over golden armor, carrying a club embedded with jewels. Theatrical, absurd, terrifying because he believed it. The crowd erupted, not all of them cheering, but enough. Noise for noise's sake, filling the silence with sound so you didn't have to think about what you were watching. Commodus raised his club, soaked in the adulation. "Now," Julia said. They pulled out the cloths. Dozens of them white fabric stained red around the edges, each one painted with a name in black letters. Marcus, Helena, Lucia, Alexios, Cassius, Tertius, Claudia. They dropped them over the rail. The cloths fell like snow, like blood. Drifting down through 50,000 people, landing on shoulders in laps across the arena sand itself. One landed at Commodus's feet. He looked down, saw the name Helena. His head snapped up, searching the crowd. But Julia and her companions were already moving, splitting up, disappearing into the mass of bodies. Soldiers pushed toward the upper tiers, but the crowd was too thick, and people were picking up the cloths now, reading the names, passing them to their neighbors. A murmur spread through the Colosseum. Not anger, not protest. Recognition.
Bestias.
In the imperial box, Senator Quintus leaned towards Senator Marcius. "Did you plan this?" "No, but I wish I had." Below them, Commodus stood frozen in the arena. The spectacle had been hijacked, his moment of divine glory interrupted by a reminder of everyone his glory had killed. His voice boomed, "Who did this?" Silence. I said, "Who?" "Does it matter?" A voice from the crowd. Old man, upper section. "The names are real," another voice. "My brother's name is there, decimated for retreating. A woman, my son, crucified for stealing bread." More voices joining, not organized, not rehearsed, just people who'd carried grief in silence for so long that the moment someone acknowledged it, they couldn't stop talking. Commodus's trainer Narcissus appeared at the arena entrance leading a prisoner. The opponent, a man who'd been a gladiator once before a leg injury ended his career. He walked with a limp, looked 50, was probably 35. "My lord," Narcissus called, "your opponent awaits." Commodus turned, grateful for the distraction, for something he could control. "Yes, good. Let's begin." But his hands were shaking. The prisoner's name was Varus. He'd killed 19 men in the arena before his injury, retired, opened a small shop selling olive oil. Then his shop burned, accident, bad luck, Rome, and he couldn't pay his debts. Debtors became criminals. Criminals became entertainment. Now he stood in the sand holding a gladius that wasn't his, facing an emperor dressed as a god. Narcissus approached Varus, pretending to check his armor. Whispered, "He's going to kill you. You understand that?" "I know. But you can make it look good. He wants a fight. Give him one. Just don't win." Varus looked at the emperor, at the jeweled club, at the golden armor that was more costume than protection. "What if I do win? Then I die. My daughter dies. Her son dies. 20 other people I've never met die." The emperor made that very clear. Varus nodded slowly. "So I die either way. But if you die well, only you die. That's supposed to comfort me." Narcissus's voice broke. "It's all I have." He walked away. Varus tested the weight of his gladius. Not balanced, deliberately. Even the weapons were fixed. He looked up at the crowd. saw the white cloths with red edges everywhere, saw people reading names, and he made a decision. The fight began. Commodus charged like he'd been trained, aggressive, flashy, no defense. Verus sidestepped, could have struck, didn't. They circled. Commodus swung his club. Verus blocked with his gladius. The impact sent shockwaves up his injured leg. He staggered. The crowd leaned forward. Commodus smiled, pressed the attack. Another swing, another block. Verus retreating, now visibly struggling. This was the script. The injured gladiator overcome by divine strength. Hercules triumphant. But then Verus stopped retreating. Commodus swung again. This time Verus ducked under it, stepped inside the emperor's guard, and placed the tip of his gladius against Commodus's throat. Not hard enough to break skin, just resting there. A promise. The entire Colosseum went silent. 50,000 people holding their breath. Commodus froze, eyes wide. Suddenly, terrifyingly aware he wasn't divine. Just a man. A man who could bleed. "What are you doing?" Commodus whispered. Verus looked at him. This close he could see the emperor's eyes, not cruel, not mad, just terrified. A child playing dress-up who'd forgotten it was pretend. "I'm supposed to die today," Verus said quietly. "But you know what, I'm tired of being told who lives and who doesn't. I'll kill your family." "I don't have family. They died years ago. The arena took them." Commodus's voice cracked. "Then what do you want?" Verus glanced up at the imperial box, at the senators, at the crowd with their cloths. "I want them to see you bleed." He pulled the gladius back 6 inches and drove it forward. Not into the throat, into the golden armor. The ceremonial piece on Commodus's shoulder. The blade punctured through, shallow, 2 inches deep, enough to draw blood, but nothing vital. Commodus screamed. Verus stepped back, dropped his gladius, raised his hands. "I yield." Archers appeared on the arena walls. 20 arrows knocked, all aimed at Verus. But Commodus was on his knees, holding his shoulder, staring at the blood on his hands. His blood. You stabbed me." "You wanted a real fight," Verus said. "That's what real fights look like. People bleed, even emperors." Narcissus ran into the arena. "My lord, let me. Get away from me." Commodus stood swaying. The crowd watched in absolute silence. No one knew what to do. This wasn't in the script. Gods don't bleed. Hercules doesn't lose. But there was the emperor, blood running down his golden armor, looking very human and very small. "Kill him," Commodus said, voice shaking. "Kill him now." The archers released. Verus didn't run, didn't beg, just stood there. 20 arrows struck him from every direction. He collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. But before he fell, he looked up at the crowd and smiled. The Colosseum erupted, not in cheers, in chaos. Half the crowd booing, a quarter cheering uncertainly, the rest just sitting in stunned silence, clutching their white cloths with red edges, watching the emperor who'd promised divinity literally bleeding in front of them. Commodus stumbled toward the exit. Narcissus tried to help. The emperor shoved him away. "This was your fault. You trained him. I trained him to lose my lord. He stabbed me. He yielded. He could have killed you. He chose not to." Commodus stopped, stared at his trainer, understanding dawning. "You wanted him to kill me." "No, my lord. You told him to fight for real. I told him to give you a good show. He did. A good show. I'm bleeding." "Yes." Narcissus met his eyes. "You are, just like everyone else who's ever bled in this arena. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, all human, all mortal, all erased so you could play God." Commodus's voice dropped to a whisper. "I could have you killed." "You already have. I'm a dead man. We both know it." He turned and walked away, leaving the emperor standing in the tunnel, dripping blood, suddenly very alone. That night, Commodus summoned his Praetorian prefect. "I want the catacombs searched, every tunnel, every passage. Find whoever dropped those cloths. Bring them to me alive. My lord, the catacombs are vast. Miles of... I don't care. Find them. The prefect bowed. Left. Commodus sat alone in his chambers, shoulder bandaged, staring at a mirror. The wound wasn't serious, would heal in weeks, but something else had broken. He'd stood in front of 50,000 Romans and bled like a common criminal. His divine image shattered, his Hercules costume revealed as just that costume. He picked up a goblet, threw it at the mirror. Glass exploded. In the shards he saw 50 reflections of himself, all of them bleeding, all of them human. Julia and her companions hid in a workshop in the Subura district. The owner, a freedman named Gaius, who'd lost his son to the games years ago, had offered shelter without asking questions. "You can't stay long," he said. "They're searching every building. We know." Was it worth it? Julia thought about Helena, about the crowd's faces when the cloths fell, about Commodus bleeding in the sand. Yes. Why? Because for 5 minutes, 50,000 people stopped pretending this was entertainment. They saw it for what it is. And what's that? Murder, dressed in gold, called justice. Gaius nodded slowly, pulled something from a shelf, a small wooden box, weathered and old. "My son carved this before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should give it to someone who'd remember." He opened it. Inside was a piece of papyrus covered in names, hundreds of them, written in a child's handwriting. He spent his last year collecting these. Names of people executed in the arena, thought someone should write them down. Julia's hands trembled as she touched the papyrus. "What was your son's name? Lucius?" She pulled out her charcoal, found a blank spot on the wall, wrote Lucius. "He'll be remembered." Gaius's eyes filled with tears. That's all any father wants. But the Praetorians were closing in. 3 buildings over, soldiers kicked down doors, interrogated families, arrested anyone who hesitated. One of Julia's companions, a young man named Felix, stood at the window watching. "They're getting closer." "How long do we have?" "Maybe an hour, maybe less." Julia looked at the others. 3 young faces, determined, terrified. "You can leave. All of you. Scatter. They're looking for me, not you." No one moved. "I mean it. This isn't your..." "Yes, it is," Felix said. "My sister died in the arena 2 years ago. They dressed her as Medusa, fed her to dogs. I watched." Another companion. "My father was decimated. I was 6. The third. My mother refused to worship the emperor's statue. They burned her alive." They all had names to remember. That's what Rome never understood. You can't erase memory by killing the people who carry it. Memory spreads, multiplies. Every execution creates witnesses. Every witness creates more carriers. "Then we finish what we started," Julia said. She pulled out the bundle of remaining cloths. "Maybe 30 left. We split up, cover different districts, drop these everywhere. If they catch us, fine. But by tomorrow morning, every street in Rome should have a name on it. And if they kill us, then someone else picks up the cloths and keeps going." So they left at midnight. 4 directions. 4 people. 120 names between them. Julia headed toward the Forum. The heart of Rome, where senators walked, where empire made its decrees. She moved through shadows, dropping cloths on doorsteps, tucking them into fountain crevices, draping them over statues. Each one a small act of defiance. Each one a refusal to let suffering be invisible. At the Temple of Saturn, she encountered a Praetorian patrol. "Stop!" She ran. Through the Forum, past shuttered shops, soldiers behind her boots on stone torches bouncing. She ducked into an alley. Dead end. Turned around. 3 soldiers, swords drawn. "You're the one from the Colosseum," the lead soldier said. Julia reached into her cloak, pulled out the last cloth, the one with her father's name, Marcus. "Yes," she said. "I am." She held up the cloth. "Let them see it. This was my father. He died speaking my name. 50,000 people heard him. You can kill me, but you can't unhear that. You can't unmake memory. The soldier stepped closer, sword raised. The Emperor wants you alive. The Emperor is bleeding in his palace right now, terrified because a retired gladiator made him human. You think I'm afraid of him? You should be. I was, for years. Then I realized fear is what they want. Fear is how they control us. But I'm done being afraid. She dropped the cloth at their feet. My name is Julia, daughter of Marcus, and you'll remember both of us. The soldier's hand tightened on his sword. Behind him, the other two guards looked uncertain. One of them, younger, maybe 20, stared at the cloth on the ground. My uncle's name is on the walls, he said quietly. In the catacombs, decimated for retreating. The lead soldier didn't turn. Shut up. I saw it when we searched the tunnels. His name. Someone remembered him. I said shut up. But his voice lacked conviction. Julia saw it. The crack. The moment of doubt. You know what's happening, don't you? She said. Rome is built on forgetting, on erasing, on pretending suffering doesn't matter. But people are remembering now. And once that starts, you can't stop it. Not with swords. Not with crosses. Not with all the arenas in the empire. The young guard lowered his sword. The lead soldier spun on him. What are you doing? I don't know. The young man's voice shook. But I'm tired of arresting people for having memories. You'll be executed for this. Probably, but at least someone will write my name on a wall. He looked at Julia. Run. Tom. She ran. Behind her, sounds of struggle, steel on steel, shouting. She didn't look back, emerged onto the Via Sacra, the sacred road, where triumph parades marched, where generals became gods. She walked now, not hiding, not running, just walking down the center of the road holding her father's cloth, daring Rome to stop her. Dawn broke over the city. In the golden light, she could see them white cloths with red edges everywhere, on walls, on statues, blowing through the forum like snow. Felix and the others had done it. The entire heart of Rome covered in names of the forgotten. She smiled, then heard footsteps behind her. Turned around. Narcissus stood there, still wearing his trainer's tunic, sword at his side. They sent you, Julia asked. No, I came on my own. To kill me. To warn you. The Emperor's ordering a purge. Everyone connected to the cloths. The catacombs, everything. By sunset, hundreds will die. So it's working. Narcissus almost laughed. You call that working? He's scared. He wouldn't purge unless he was scared. He's also insane. There's a difference. Julia looked at him, this man who'd trained killers, who'd fixed fights, who'd enabled a madman for years. Why warn me? Because yesterday I watched a dying gladiator smile at his executioners, and I realized he won. Not the fight. Something bigger. He made them uncomfortable. Made them see. And I've spent 30 years making sure people don't see. Making sure the horror looks like entertainment. He pulled something from his belt. A cloth with a name. Varus. I'm done, Narcissus said. Done fixing fights. Done pretending this is normal. Done being afraid. He handed her the cloth. Add his name to your walls. He deserves it. Then he walked away toward the Colosseum, toward whatever came next. Julia stood alone in the forum as the sun rose over Rome, holding two cloths now, her father's and Varus's. Behind her, the city was waking. People emerging from their homes, seeing the names, reading them, carrying them inside, memory spreading like fire. And she understood Rome's greatest torture wasn't what it did to bodies. It was what it tried to do to memory. But memory once sparked doesn't die. It multiplies, until even emperors bleed. By noon, the Senate convened an emergency session, not to discuss policy, not to debate law, to decide what to do about names written on walls. Senator Marcius stood before his colleagues exhausted. He'd been up all night walking the forum reading the cloths. Gentlemen, we have a problem. Senator Quintus, always pragmatic, always careful, shifted in his seat. The cloths will be removed. The girl will be caught. This will pass. Will it? Marcius gestured toward the door. Beyond it, the forum buzzed with unusual energy. People weren't shopping. They were reading walls. Half of Rome is standing outside right now looking at names of people we executed. Our fathers executed. Our grandfathers executed. Do you understand what that means? An older senator, Gaius Severus, 70-years-old veteran of 3 wars, spoke quietly. It means they're finally paying attention. Exactly. And attention is dangerous. Severus smiled, sad, knowing. I was at the Via Appia when they crucified Spartacus's rebels. 6,000 crosses. I was 17. My father made me walk the entire road. This is what happens to those who challenge Rome, he said. I threw up 3 times. Nightmares for years. He paused, looked around the chamber. But you know what, within a decade we stopped talking about it. Stopped remembering. Convinced ourselves it was necessary. Justice. That's what Rome does best. We forget. We move on. We build monuments to glory and bury the bodies underneath. So, what are you saying? Quintus asked. I'm saying maybe it's time we stopped forgetting. The chamber erupted. Senators shouting. Some agreeing. Most outraged. But Marcius noticed something. The young senators, the ones who'd never fought in wars, never ordered executions, never watched the games without feeling sick. They were silent, just listening, thinking. The future of Rome, deciding whether to repeat its past or learn from it. In the imperial palace, Commodus sat in his private chambers, shoulder bandaged, staring at reports. His praetorian prefect stood at attention. The searches continue, my lord. We've arrested 43 people connected to the cloth distribution. Most are in the Tullianum awaiting. Have you found her, Julia? Not yet. Commodus threw the report across the room. How? How does one girl evade the entire Praetorian Guard? She has help. The lower districts are hiding her. Every time we get close, someone misdirects us. We arrest them, 10 more take their place. Then arrest them all. The prefect hesitated. My lord, that's 30,000 people, maybe more. We don't have the capacity. I don't care about capacity. I care about control. I am the emperor. I am Hercules. I am... He stopped, looked at his bandaged shoulder. He was bleeding. Still bleeding. 2 days later, the physician said it was infected. Something in the gladius. Rust. Dirt. The wound wouldn't close properly. My lord, the prefect prompted, get out. The man left quickly. Alone, Commodus stood and walked to his mirror, the one he'd shattered now replaced. Looked at himself. Golden armor gone. Lion skin gone. Just a man with a bandage looking 20 years older than he had a week ago. He thought about his father, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, the last of the good ones. His father had written in his meditations, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. Commodus had never understood it. His father's obsession with virtue while maintaining an empire built on cruelty. Now, staring at his reflection, he wondered if his father had simply been a coward, unwilling to change the system, unwilling to stop the games, unwilling to admit that philosophy and empire were incompatible. Or maybe his father understood something Commodus didn't, that empires don't change through decree. They change when enough people decide they're tired of being complicit. Julia spent 3 days moving through Rome's underground, the real underground, not just catacombs, safe houses, hidden rooms, networks of people who'd been resisting quietly for decades. An old woman named Drusilla led her through a tunnel beneath the Tiber. We've been doing this since Nero, Drusilla said. Hiding Christians mostly, but also deserters, escaped slaves, anyone Rome decided was disposable. How many of you are there? Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. You never know everyone. Safer that way. But we all know the same thing. What's that? That empire is held together by two things: violence and silence. Break either one, the whole structure shakes. They emerged in a warehouse near the Tiber docks. Inside, 50 people worked by candlelight. Not fighters, not rebels, scribes. They were copying names from Julia's original lists, making duplicates, hundreds of them. Felix was there directing the operation. Julia. He hugged her quickly. We thought you'd been caught. Almost. Narcissus warned me. The Emperor's trainer. Why would he? Because he's tired. We're all tired. Even the people enforcing the system are breaking. Felix showed her the operation. Tables covered in papyrus, ink pots, scribes working in shifts. We've copied 12,000 names so far. We're distributing them to every city in the empire. Alexandria, Carthage, Athens, everywhere. Julia's hands trembled. 12,000. And counting. Every name you carved in the catacombs. Every name from the arena records we stole. Every crucifixion. Every decimation. Every execution disguised as entertainment. Rome will kill you for this. Rome is already killing us. At least this way we die for something. One of the scribes, an elderly man with ink-stained fingers, looked up. I was a slave for 40 years, he said. Freed at 60. Spent my freedom learning to read. You know what I read first? The execution lists. Wanted to see if my son's name was there. He was taken when he was 12. Never saw him again. Did you find him? Yes. Executed at 15 for stealing fish. No trial. No record. Just gone. He held up a piece of papyrus. A name written carefully. Darius. But not anymore, the old man said. Now he's remembered. That's worth dying for. Julia looked at the room full of scribes, at the stacks of papyrus, at the network of people who'd decided remembering mattered more than surviving. And she understood something. Rome had spent 1,000 years perfecting the machinery of death. These people were building the machinery of memory. And memory, it turned out, was stronger. On the 5th day after the games, Commodus collapsed. The infection in his shoulder had spread. Fever, delirium. The physicians tried everything: leeches, poultices, prayers to Asclepius. Nothing worked. By sunset, his advisors were preparing for succession. Praetorians taking positions. Senators calculating alliances. Narcissus stood outside the emperor's chambers, listening to the man he'd served for years, thrash and fever dreams calling for his father. A young Praetorian approached. The prefect wants to know if the emperor dies, do we continue the purge? Narcissus looked at him. Really looked. The guard was maybe 22, scared, uncertain. What's your name? Narcissus asked. Sir. Your name. What is it? Lucius, sir. Lucius. If the emperor dies, you're free to choose what kind of man you want to be. The kind who follows orders without thinking, or the kind who asks if the orders make sense. I don't understand, sir. You will, eventually. Narcissus walked away. Down the marble corridors, past golden statues, out into the forum where white cloths still hung on every surface despite the Praetorians' best efforts. He found a blank wall near the Temple of Saturn, pulled out a piece of charcoal, and wrote a name, Varus. Then another Titus, the young soldier beaten to death by his unit. Then another, all 63 men decimated for retreating. He wrote until his hand cramped, until dawn light filled the forum, until a crowd gathered behind him watching in silence. When he finished, he turned around. 200 people stood there. Citizens, slaves, soldiers off duty, just watching. I trained gladiators for 30 years, Narcissus said, his voice carried across the forum. I fixed fights, made sure the emperor always won, made sure the spectacle looked real enough to entertain but fake enough to control. He gestured at the wall. These are the people I helped kill. By silence. By complicity. By telling myself I was just following orders. A Praetorian in the crowd stepped forward. Sir, you're confessing to being Roman, to participating in a system that turns suffering into entertainment. We're all guilty. Every single one of us who's ever walked past a cross without stopping. Every person who's ever attended the games and convinced ourselves it was justice. The crowd murmured, not angry, not defensive, ashamed. So what do we do? Someone asked. Narcissus looked at the names on the wall, at the faces around him, at the city he'd served his entire life. We remember, he said. We stop forgetting. We acknowledge what we've done. And we decide whether to keep doing it or become something different. The Emperor will execute you for this. The Emperor is dying, and whoever comes next will have to decide what kind of empire they want to inherit, one built on fear or one capable of mercy. He walked away. Behind him, people approached the wall, started reading names, some crying, some just standing in silence, bearing witness. Commodus died 3 days later. Official cause infection from the gladiator's wound. Unofficial cause the same thing that kills all empires eventually. The realization that cruelty has diminishing returns, that you can only terrorize people for so long before they stop being afraid and start being angry. That memory is more powerful than violence. His successor, Pertinax, an old general who'd never enjoyed the games, made his first decree as emperor suspend all executions for 30 days. Not end them. Not abolish them. Just pause. Let Rome catch its breath. Let people remember what normal felt like. It wasn't revolution. It wasn't transformation. But it was a crack in the machinery. And through that crack, something new began growing. Julius stood in the Forum 6 months later, no longer hiding. The Praetorians had stopped searching. The purge had ended. Not because Pertinax was merciful, but because he was practical. You can't arrest 30,000 people for remembering. You can't execute everyone who refuses to forget. Eventually, you have to accept that empire can't survive on terror alone. She approached the wall where Narcissus had written names. It was covered now. Thousands of them. People had kept adding, kept remembering. A young boy stood there with his mother pointing at names. Is our family there? He asked. His mother searched, found one Tertius. That's your grandfather, she said. He died before you were born. What did he do? He believed mercy was stronger than empire. Was he right? She looked at her son, at the wall, at the city around them where people were slowly, painfully learning to remember. I think we're still finding out. The historian Cassius Dio would later write, in the reign of Commodus, Rome reached the apex of its cruelty and the beginning of its conscience. The two could not coexist. He was right. Within a century, the games would diminish. The crosses would come down. Christianity, that religion of executed criminals and remembered suffering, would become the empire's official faith. Not because Rome suddenly became good, but because enough people decided that forgetting was more painful than remembering. That pretending suffering was entertainment was worse than acknowledging it was horror. That the names of the forgotten mattered more than the glory of the empire. Julia lived another 40 years. She never stopped carving names, never stopped teaching others to read them, never stopped insisting that memory was resistance. When she died, they found her in the catacombs, charcoal in hand, adding one final name to the wall, her own. Beneath it, she'd written, I was here, I remembered, it mattered. And here's the thing about Rome's cruelty, the crosses, the arenas, the bronze bulls, the decimations. Rome's torture methods didn't disappear. They evolved, changed names, changed uniforms, appeared in different centuries with different justifications. But the names survived. Marcus, Helena, Lucia, Alexios, Cassius, Maya, Verus, Tertius, Claudia, Narcissus, Julia, and 10,000 others carved into stone, written on papyrus, whispered in the darkness by people who refused to let suffering be meaningless. Today, you can visit the catacombs beneath Rome, walk through tunnels where Christians hid, where the forgotten built their alternative city, where walls are covered in names. Most tourists take pictures and move on. But sometimes, if you're paying attention, you'll see someone stop, read a name, touch the carved letters, and understand something Rome never wanted them to know: that the crucified can be remembered, that the erased can be restored, that suffering when witnessed and named becomes testimony. And testimony accumulated over centuries becomes the weight that finally breaks empire. Rome didn't fall because of barbarian invasions. Rome fell because its citizens finally looked at the machinery of cruelty they'd maintained for 1,000 years and said, no more. Not with violence, not with revolution, with something quieter and more dangerous: memory. The names are still there, in stone, in archives, in the genetic memory of every person who's ever asked what happened to them. Who were they? Did anyone remember? Empires rise and fall, stones crumble to dust, but names spoken with intention, carved with purpose, remembered with love, those endure. So here's what Rome's torture methods actually taught us. Not that humans are capable of inflicting unimaginable cruelty, but that humans are capable of surviving it, documenting it, and transforming suffering into memory that outlasts empire itself. Marcus died speaking his daughter's name. Julia died carving names in the dark. Both of them won. Not immediately, not obviously, but permanently, because you just heard their names. 2,000 years later, across oceans Rome never crossed, in a language Rome never spoke, proving that Rome's greatest torture, the attempt to erase you from existence, can be defeated by the simplest act of human defiance: remembering. If you believe their names deserve to survive, share this story. And in the comments below, write a name. Someone history tried to forget. Someone whose suffering mattered. Someone who deserves to be remembered. Because that's how we honor them. That's how we resist. That's how we prove that empire, no matter how powerful, cannot kill memory. Write a name. Any name. That's how we win.